Hello, and today we're joined by Kevin Day, comedian and Crystal Palace fan. Hiya, Kevin. How are you doing today?
I'm very well, Angus. How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Comedian and Crystal Palace fan often goes together.
So, what is your first memory of playing football?
Oh, of playing football. That's a good question. Probably, and one of the earliest photographs of me is me posing proudly in front of my dad, kneeling down with a football in a sort of generic red football shirt, which was bought from Tooting Market, and white shorts and boots, which I dressed up in to play football in the street. So probably my earliest memories of playing football would be like playing free and in outside with the kids in the road, really. And then I played quite a lot of Sunday football, but I was terrible. I was a right back, but I was even by right back standards, I was slow. And even at 19, I mean, you hear a lot of people say, "Well, I got to 39 and my legs went about 18, 19, basically." So I played for a lot of Sunday football teams, but basically they were the same team. It's like we went through about 5 different name changes and 5 different kits, but essentially it was the same group of lads. So I used to love playing football, but I knew from an early age I was no good at it. I was good at five-a-side. I used to work for the ambulance service, and I was the goalkeeper in the ambulance service five-a-side team. But I had lots of ambitions as a footballer, but just the body didn't match what the mind wanted to do, basically.
What is your first memory of watching football?
I think it's probably a false memory, Angus. To be honest, I've got this memory of watching, I think, the World Cup final as a tiny kid in 1966 with my dad. But I think I've probably implanted that myself, really. And of course, growing up, and until we were sort of 8 or 9, we weren't allowed to go to football, even with an adult, basically. So my mum was quite worried about the whole thing. So it was watching it on telly was my sort of my memories. I can't. That's a really interesting question. I'm not even sure what my first Palace match was, because there's a family argument that's still raging about whether or not my dad took me to see Man United in 1969 when I was little, or whether my uncle took me to see us against Stoke a couple of years later. So if I can't tell you what game was the first one I went to, I can't tell you what. I think I'll probably stick with the World Cup final because it sounds quite cool. I'm probably the only person who's old enough to claim to have watched the World Cup final in 1966. And of course, Angus, I can only apologise to all your Scottish viewers for doing what you would immediately expect an Englishman to do and crowbar in the 1966 World Cup as early as possible.
What was the first kit you had?
Well, the first kit I had would have been that sort of it wasn't even a kit. It was a red T-shirt, and it's hard for modern fans to realise that you just couldn't buy replica kits when I was a kid. One of the reasons I supported Palace is because they were my local team, but Wimbledon was closer, but they were a non-league team. But my first day at primary school, I sat next to a kid, A, who was so much taller than me, I thought I was in the wrong class, but B, he had a Palace jumper. His mum had knitted him a Palace jumper. It was claret and light blue stripes, which I just thought was the coolest thing I'd ever seen in my life. That's why I became a Palace fan. And 50 odd years later, he's still my best mate, and we still go to Palace together. But probably the first replica shirt I owned was probably the 1976 white shirt with the red and blue sash. Was probably the first. I've got memories of that being the first sort of kit I had, because we started, I suppose, in the mid-70s, the club started selling replica kits. So that would have been the first one, definitely. But my first proper football kit would have been my school kit, and then my Sunday team kit, which was green and black stripes initially. I'm obsessed with football kits. I'm slightly distracted by your studio backdrop. I'm trying to work out what the shirts are. It's a real fetish. I love football shirts, for me, my favourite ever football shirt is still that Palace shirt, the claret shirt with light blue stripes and a yellow collar. But one of the reasons I fell in love with football as a kid was just the colours of the kits, and I used to get Subbuteo teams, but not play Subbuteo. I just had the teams as like an art in my bedroom, which was a sad thing to say. I'd have airplanes hanging off the wall, and I had Carl Zeiss Jena, an East German team. They were my favourite. But I just had Milan and Inter Milan, Celtic and Hibs and all sorts. I'm giving away my allegiances there. But also, I just used to love football kits. I still do. I still adore football shirts.
So what's the worst kit you've ever seen?
I think that would have to be the whole City one. It was around about 1994, 95, which was actual tiger stripes. It was, I mean, it's a difficult kit, the whole kit, because it's a funny sort of muddy amber colour anyway, but they just went full on marketing mad basically, and it was a football kit but had genuine sort of tiger stripes on it, which on a tiger looks great, but on a on a second division footballer, not so good. I think, and close up as well. That was a hideous. I also used to hate that Arsenal away kit, the sort of faded yellow blue check kit. Wasn't a fan of that one. I can't. I was trying to think of a Palace kit actually, because I thought you might ask me, but I can't think of a single Palace kit I don't love. Obviously, I wasn't too keen on the one that was half red, half blue. But I've got a thing. I really can't stand French football shirts because they're just so busy. Yeah, it's just I like a shirt. I'm old-fashioned like this. I like one colour basically, or just proper stripes. But some of the French shirts, because they've got sponsorship and advertising all over them, I don't like it. My eyes go a bit funny. A man of my age can't look at a French football shirt for too long.
What's the best ever game you've been to?
Oh, that's a good question, because sometimes your favourite game isn't the best game of football. Recently, don't be alarmed, that's my wife in the background. I think recently probably the best game was the one we called Cristanbul, where we were 3-0 down to Liverpool. Yeah. It's when Brendan Rodgers' team needed to they were behind the City on goal difference, but by a long way. They needed to score goals, and they played us off the pitch. They were fantastic in the first half. They were 3-0 up midway through the second half. And then Damien Delaney, he swears blind he didn't get a deflection, but he got a massive deflection. And then Dwight Gale, we scored 2 goals in 2 mad minutes and could have won the game. So that was probably the most recently exciting. I would have to say that my favourite would be the 1990 FA Cup semi-final at Villa Park, when we'd lost 9-0 to Liverpool earlier that season, which was one of those results that's so humiliating you can only laugh about it really. So, but that Liverpool team were fantastic, and they went 1-0 up against us. And my abiding memory is before the game they had this RAF dog display team exhibition, because that's how long ago it was. That was pre-match entertainment in those days. Some people from the RAF had some dogs, and the first dog had a red shirt on. So they on the PA they said, right, this is the Liverpool dog. You support this. And this Liverpool dog was fantastic. It jumped through the flaming hoop. It ran across the beams. It went up the ladders. It went on a seesaw. It broke the world record for some kind of dog display thing. And the next dog was the Palace dog, and it fell off the ladder getting up. It didn't even make it to the assault course. So that was a bad omen. And again, in the first half, they really played us off the pitch. But the one thing we knew about Palace is that we were really fit. We were a really fit side. We were quite a mean team as well. I was quite proud at the time that the 2 meanest teams in the first division were Palace and Wimbledon, 2 South London teams. But then at the start of the second half, we equalised out of nowhere, and that was just an amazing afternoon. And it was our first real. We'd had the team of the 80s, but this was the first real sniff of success we were starting to get. We had 7 or 8 players from South London, and I just remember almost being too exhausted to celebrate at the final whistle. But that was probably my favourite game ever. That was the most amazing game to be a Palace fan at. And I can actually say on here, all I can say is Villa Park must have had a big away end, because there's about 70,000 Palace fans claim to have been there that day. But that was my abiding. I think that of all the games I'd have to choose, Palace-wise, that would be the one.
Would you say that's the best moment supporting Crystal Palace?
I think you can see my wife in the background, but she knows I've said this before. I think the split second the whistle went that day, I think, is one of the happiest moments of my life. And yeah, of course, football's not more important than life. It's not more important than being married. It's not more important than having a son. But just that split second and the sort of 5 seconds after, and only a football fan can really understand that, Angus. And you can't you can't expect. It's like I like theatre, I love reading, I like opera, I like all sorts of things, but nothing else in my life can come close to giving you that. You know, you don't close a book and just have 5 seconds of, yeah, that was. And when you support a team like Palace, that when you know it's going to be far, you know, there's going to be few and far between. It was just, I think that probably was the happiest I've ever been for that 5 or 6 seconds, and then after the rest of it became a blur. I mean, we were all so tired. It was so emotionally exhausting seeing this, because we were 1-0 down, we were 2-1 up, we were 3-2 down, and then we got back to 4-3, and it was just the players were exhausted, we were exhausted. But that 5 seconds is why you're a football fan. That's it makes everything worthwhile, and even the bad times afterwards, you just kind of go to a nice place in your head and remember that moment. So that was probably definitely the happiest I've ever been as a football fan.
So what's been your worst moment supporting Crystal Palace?
Now, how long have we got on this? I think as a Palace fan, you get used to relegate. The worst moment, there were 2 worst moments. I think the very worst moment was the second time we went into administration in 2010. And it looked like we were going out of business. And there was a High Court winding up petition going on. And we were 10 minutes from not existing as a club, and we'd had meetings and we talked about having a Phoenix club and all sorts of things. But I think the 10 minutes before the new Palace owners came out and announced that they'd bought the club and saved it, I think that 10 minutes was probably the worst I've ever had as a football fan. And again, it's one of those things that only football fans would understand. But I felt heartbroken for Bury fans when that happened to the club. There might only be 5,000 Bury fans. There might only be 3,000 Bury season ticket holders. But for them, it means everything. It's the most important thing in the world. And to lose your football club, and then of course the local area loses business as well. But the thought of Palace not being there was just heartbreaking. And I think that was the worst, because you kind of, as you get older, the football becomes less important. And what I really miss at the moment, I mean, I can't wait for football to start again, but what I really miss is the talking nonsense in the pub beforehand. It's like, as my wife calls it, talking the same bollocks to the same people in the same corner of the pub that you have done for 20 years. That's what I miss. That's what I love about football. As long as I've got a Palace team to support, and of course I want them to be in the Premier League, but if we're in the Championship, that's a shame, but it's not the end of the world. But so I'm not that fussed. I still get nervous about results, but winning or losing is less important now. But the thought of not having a Palace to support for that 10 minutes was awful. It was heartbreaking. It really was heartbreaking.
What's the best stadium you've ever been to?
Well, Selhurst Park, obviously, it's the best stadium I've ever been to. It's certainly my favourite. Of course, it is. Mm-hmm. That's I think. I've got this old-fashioned. I like old-fashioned stadiums. I like Goodison Park is one of my favourite stadiums. But it's like people say to me when I say old-fashioned, what I really mean is ramshackle. Basically, I used to love Highbury. So when I went to the Emirates for the first time, when I was doing Match of the Day 2, we covered the change from the Emirates to Highbury. So we filmed there quite a lot at the old place and then go into the new place. And it's like, it's just not the same. I mean, the new place is a beautiful, beautiful stadium, but Highbury was something special. I think probably the new Wembley is probably the best stadium. The San Siro, I love going to the San Siro, but I get a bit cross with new stadiums, to be perfectly honest. I mean, Anfield was brilliant, but the atmosphere at Anfield isn't always as brilliant as it should be. I mean, sometimes like an evening game in the Champions League, for example, there's no way to compare to Anfield. But if you go there, I've seen Palace win there a couple of times, and you know, they go quite quickly. So it's like it's a nice stadium. Old Trafford was a letdown, I have to say. Going to Old Trafford, that really is surprisingly. Outside it looks fantastic, but inside it's getting really tatty. I suppose the new Tottenham Stadium would have to be the best stadium I've ever been to be perfectly honest. I mean, we've got the unique extinction. We've already lost twice at the new Tottenham Stadium. We were the first team to play there and the first team to lose, and we've lost since. But I mean, it's such an amazing stadium. It doesn't quite look right because it's in a very run-down part of London. it's in a very poor part of London, and I don't think Tottenham, and Tottenham fans agree with me on this, some of them, I don't think Tottenham have been brilliant in including the local people in the plans for the stadium. So it looks like this space age stadium has been plonked down in a really run-down area, but it's an amazing stadium, so amazing that it's hard to believe it's in England, to be perfectly honest, because it I don't think they'll ever quite replicate it. I mean, they want it to have that end. They want it to be like Dortmund. They want to have like a white wall, but I don't think you can make those things happen. Those things either happen or they don't happen. But it is a very impressive. It's a very impressive stadium. And I think Tottenham will be the team that struggled most from playing behind closed doors, because that's a big old stadium to be rattling about in.
So, what was the last game you went to before COVID shut down?
The last game was the last game we played, so that would have been Watford at home, when we scored. That's terrible. Jordan Ayew. That's a terrible middle eight. It's been so long. Jordan Ayew scored a really good goal against Watford, and it all came as such a shock, because we were sitting in the pub, the same pub that we've been going to for 25 years, and we kind of knew it was happening, but we didn't. The Cheltenham Festival was still going on. It didn't have any sort of sense that football or sport was about to close down as soon as it was. Because if we did, I think we'd have said a proper goodbye to the pub, actually. But it was quite a good game, because ironically, the last 3 games before football closed down, we won 1-0. So when UEFA said that one of the ways of sorting out who were champions was on current form, I was actually quite excited, because that would have been a really unusual thing to happen to Palace, that we suddenly became champions by winning 3 games on the trot. So we were almost safe from relegation. So I'm kind of, I still, as I say, I do, despite everything I said about not worrying about the results when I get older, I still do worry a little bit. So I'll be glad when we get that sort of point and be safe from relegation. But yeah, we beat Watford, and it's really good to beat Watford. There's a strange rivalry has developed between us and Watford, and it's strange because we don't give a monkeys about Watford, but they really hate us. We beat them in the playoff final in 2013, and Wilf Zaha got the penalty at the end. He did not dive. It's quite clear he didn't dive. Wilf never dives. He might maximise his falling opportunities, but he doesn't dive. He's the most fouled player in the Premier League. But ever since we beat them in that playoff final, one of their old players, Kevin Phillips, scored the penalty. They really don't like us, and they really hate Wilf Zaha. So it was really good to go into lockdown with that win under our belts, and against Watford too. So we were actually starting to. A Roy Hodgson Palace team is not necessarily the most exciting thing to watch, except when it gets to around March, April. I don't know if it's deliberate, but he suddenly seems to let us off the leash. So we were suddenly starting to play a little bit of good football. So I'll be interested to see how it pans out when the games are back behind closed doors. So I hope the one thing we'll have to do is use the opportunity to play younger players, because like a lot of Premier League managers, Hodgson is very reluctant to play some of the kids. But if they're having 5 subs in Premier League football, I think he'll have to play some of our youngsters, because we've got some really good, exciting youngsters coming up. Hopefully, we've got a good crop.
And just finally, when was the last time you had to pay for a ticket to go to a football match?
That's a good question. I'm not going to lie. I do get a free season ticket. I get 3 season tickets, one for my mate and one for my son and one for me. And I pay for 2 of them, but it's partly because I have done a lot of work for the club in recent years with the foundation and with charity stuff. And I used to be part of an educational group at the club that I helped to wind up. And so you're probably the first person to know that I get a free season ticket, actually. But I feel I've paid my dues. It's just occurred to me when you're talking about bad moments playing football. It's probably Sellers Park was one of the worst moments. I did a charity thing at half time, and I had to take a penalty in front of the Homesdale. And I've never been slim, to be perfectly honest. And at the time, I definitely wasn't slim. And when you're taking a penalty in front of 5,000 of your own fans, making judgments about your weight and about whether or not you're going to score, and naturally, I zoomed it over the bar as well, so that was a long walk off the pitch. So I think I've done enough to earn a free season ticket at Sellers Park, and I Angus, I can't wait to get back there.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's. How do you feel about the Scottish football being ended without even games being played behind closed doors?
Well, many clubs can't afford it, but
Yeah,
now that there's this guy donating £3 million, I think it'll really help the game.
yeah,
Hopefully.
yeah, yeah. I think the important thing is that football starts up next season. That's
Mm-hmm.
why I understand that a lot of, you know, if you're a Tranmere fan, for example, and you're relegated without playing a game, or if you're a Peterborough fan and you don't get in the playoffs, I understand why people are really angry about League One and League Two not carrying on. But the important thing is that football carries on. And like you say, if you make a club in, you know, the Scottish Championship play behind closed doors without any fans, they still have to get stewards and police. So they can't afford to do that. So I think it's probably the right decision, but it's hard without football, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's really difficult.
Mm-hmm. Right, Kevin, that wraps it up. Thank you for coming on. It's been a pleasure interviewing you.
Yeah, thank you for the questions. I will say what I always say is my wife makes me say, sorry, I'm talk too much. I do apologise.
It's fine.
I tend to answer questions I wasn't asked. And again, I'm still really distracted by your studio. It's such a great studio. I'm trying to work out who some of the players are. I've moved on from the kits onto the players. So.
Right, thank you.